feature or a vulnerability? It's a question as old as Windows. And Windows is pretty old. Anybody remember Windows Bob? Got a few people here remember Windows Bob. Anybody remember Windows Vista? Anybody here watch the IT crowd? You know the scene where there's a bomb diffusal robot that's having issues and it goes, which OS is it running? Oh, it's running Windows Vista. Oh, we're screwed. We're gonna die. So feature or a vulnerability is a question that we often ponder with when we're doing the pen test report, because we're telling the client that you're doing something that isn't right, and they go, well, that's what Microsoft says we should do. And Microsoft's documentation says I should do this. So, and Microsoft has, in the past years, a few years, has done a good job of explaining what's right and wrong. They've done a bad job of explaining what's in between, or how it may apply to your environment. So we're gonna talk about some stuff in here. I'm going to show you some examples. I want to preface that with, this is not about staying stealthy. I'm talking about stuff that we do very loud. So you may see something and you go, well, I'm gonna detect that. First of all, I would like to test that assumption. But secondly, that's not what this talk about. Right? So feature or a vulnerability in AD environments. And who am I? I'm Qasim. If you say awesome, you can stop there. But you can put a K before that. It's Qasim, right? So I am Director of Offensive Security at Blue Bastion. We do both blue and red teaming, which is awesome because I get to see how my stuff is being detected, and I get to teach my blue team some of the cool tricks. We just did a talk at work last week where we talked about using GitHub Actions for lateral movement. Did you know when you use GitHub Actions, you can have a Windows or a Linux VM or a Docker container spun up in Azure for free for up to 6 hours, and you can use that for lateral movement. So we get to talk about that kind of stuff with our blue team, blow their minds. They blow our minds with how they detected us. I come from a lot of healthcare security background. I used to be a HIPAA high trust assessor. I have worked in a lot of spreadsheets as part of my assessments. I do a lot of teaching. So this slide, this talk may feel like I'm teaching. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Don't hesitate to challenge. I'm not an AD admin. I did not start pen testing AD by first learning AD. I was a Linux Unix admin. I used to do HP UX, IBM AIX. My beard is not as gray, but it's getting there. And so I do not have that AD building experience. I have experience breaking it. So as I go through this, you have something to contribute. Would love to hear it. I have also taught at classes, BSides, Blackhat. I also teach an OSCP bootcamp. In fact, we'll be teaching at Wild West Hacking Fest and Texas Cyber Summit. Pretty excited about that. So how do we let ourselves in? Generally, when a pen test occurs, you'll have the pen tester either come on site, plug into an Ethernet port or wireless, maybe give them VPN access. Maybe they'll send you a device. It's Intel NUC or something small like that to plug into your network. They'll be like, we're shipping you a drone. As a brown guy, I'm like, I'm gonna duck. So I think one person got that. All right. So how do we let ourselves in? If you have worked in Wireshark, and on this box I don't have that Wireshark installed on this, but what you'll start seeing is this kind of traffic. How many of you know that DNS doesn't really matter when it comes to name resolution in Windows networks? In college, we were taught that you want to find out where google.com is, you want to find out where Alta Vista is, or Dogpile is, which by the way still works. Dogpile is still a search engine and it works. Okay? So you want to find out where those names are. In college, we are taught we're going to ask the domain name server. In reality, first our system checks, am I that domain name? Am I google.com? If I'm not, Is it in my static entries in etc host file? If it's not, I'm going to ask everyone. In addition to DNS, I still ask DNS. But I'm also going to ask everybody in the network, do you know where google.com is? Do you know where HR share is? That / you see before HR share, for those of you who don't have a lot of AD experience, that's a UNC path. That is how you access file shares, Windows systems, over CIFS, over SMB in Windows. So I'm asking everybody over a broadcast protocol, which is NBNS, Net BIOS Name Service, or multicast protocols, which are MDNS. For those of you with Macs, your Mac is sending out who is Qasim's MacBook. And everybody in here knows Qasim has a MacBook. And then who's sending out Luke's iPhone, or all that fun jazz in there. And that MDNS request is being sent out to everybody in Mac. Same thing in Windows now. Linux does the same thing over MDNS and Avahi. Windows specifically, though, is very bad with this, because that broadcast multicast request that's sent out asking, do you know where this share is? Anybody who responds first is going to obtain the NTLM hash. Okay? That's the net NTLM handshake hash. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but this is what that's going to look like. First, what you end up with is, if you look on the left side, somebody tried to send out open up a share. In this case, they mistyped it. Honestly, it doesn't matter if you mistype or not. The request is still going out. Okay? On the right side, what you see is us running responder and obtaining that hash. Simply just listening. That's all we're doing. Okay? I just read a book from Oscar Trimboli, How to Listen. Really amazing book, by the way. Really good book. And I was thinking about this when I was reading that book, because as a red teamer, just listening to the network, just sitting there and listening, I learned so much about the network. I learned what operating systems are being used, what the usernames are. Anybody here use PDQ Deploy? I'm not really meaning to shit on them, but had a client where they were using PDQ Deploy to automatically find new devices, log into them using domain credentials, and make sure they are configured properly. They're secure hardened. Really good use case. What happens when my Kali box connects to the network and your PDQ Deploy tries to log into my Kali box and install software? I get PDQ Deploy's hash because I'm listening. Simply listening, I get that hash because in Windows, communication happens over NTLM or Kerberos. In this case, NTLM, PDQ Deploy logs into me using NTLM, I get the hash. If PDQ Deploy is logging into multiple systems, installing software, what privilege do you think it has? Pretty much domain admin generally. And I don't mean to say it's just PDQ Deploy. I don't think it was the tool, it's how it was configured. Okay? Oftentimes it's about the configuration of the tools. Simply listening, I get the net NTLM hash, or responding. In this case, if you look, the first thing is we get MDNS and an LLMNR request for that share. We respond, and everything you see right here, starting from the word vagrant, that's the username vagrant on parent workstation box, we get the hash. On Apple M2 Air MacBooks, you can, and this is the MacBook Air, I was just testing it out last night, you get 193 mega hashes per second crack rate on this. Okay? That is 193 million guesses. That's a pretty good rate. Good luck with a password like welcome 2023. Okay. I did have a client who had a 25 character password limit. The first password I cracked was A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So I don't have to just crack the hash. I can relay it. So in this case, what you see me doing is I obtain the hash from FileMaker user on the host 1.3, and I relay it to 1.4. I tell FileMaker user on 1.3, hey, the host you're looking for, the name you're looking for, it's me. Authenticate with me. It authenticates with me, gives me its hash. I take that over to 1.4. I get high privilege in 1.4 because FileMaker is a local admin there. I start dumping NT and LM hashes from SAM. This is what Luke was talking about earlier in EZDA. Broadcast protocols just sitting in the network, listening, and then responding. And when we respond, either we end up cracking the hash, or we end up relaying it. And this is not the user's fault. Bad password, yes. Well, even then, I would less blame the user. I think generally, we have some systematic issues and some policy issues there, some cultural issues. But in this case, I didn't even crack the hash. I just relayed it. I took it from one host and went to another, logged in as FileMaker, and I dumped SAM hashes. If I sit there long enough, I may end up getting domain admin's hash. Maybe the DA logged in to install a software somewhere. Okay? So very common way we go about this and get hashes. This has worked for me since the beginning. We've been joking about this for like a decade now, and it still works. And the reason relay is working is because we are not making sure that when Qasim says, here's my hash, that hash was actually from Qasim's host. That was from the right host. Okay? So how do we prevent this? How do we stop this? First of all, you don't need broadcast multicast name resolution. You have a name server called DNS. Okay? There are some software, some tools that will still prefer MDNS. Google Chromecast, your Apple TV, some printers want MDNS. If they really, really need it, put them on a separate segment. They should already be on a separate segment. Why in the world is your Google Chromecast in the same segment as your domain controllers? Well, story time. When I was starting out in IT, I was an intern. I helped a company set up their domain controller because it was totally screwed up. If you have to bring an intern to fix your domain controller, it's really screwed up. Okay? And what I found was on the domain controller, they were downloading TV shows using QTorrent. And they were downloading Grey's Anatomy. So I knew this was not a good company to work at. So start by disabling your NetBIOS name resolution service, NBNS, your LLNR, your MDNS. These are group policies. MDNS, though, still ends up being a registry change. The broadcast protocol, NBNS disablement, is in the IPv4 adapters settings. And the LLMNR is a multicast setting inside group policy. Okay? Change those, disable those. Also, enforce SMB signing. Don't just enable it, enforce it. There are three options: disable SMB signing, enable, and enforce. Enable gives the client the option to choose. Enforce doesn't. You want enforcement. Windows 11 is going to start enforcing that by default. So that's a good change. If you really want to waste my time, which you should, if you really want to make my job difficult, which you should, use deception. I got caught in a red team engagement because I responded to a broadcast multicast name resolution request. Got a call from the client. They said, gotcha. And it's because they had a honeypot user sending out broadcast multicast requests. You simply create a scheduled task in Windows, have it ping a host that doesn't exist, using a user that is low privileged, and you have good deception there. Whoever responds to that broadcast multicast request is a liar. They are the threat actor in your network. So you just caught them. So we obtained access by responding to broadcast multicast name resolution, relayed it, or cracked it. What's next? Well, let's start moving around. Let's see what is in the other hosts. Let's see what else is happening in the network. So this is pass the hash. This should, the way I'm doing this in here should light up your SIM. Okay. What I'm doing in here is using a tool called CrackMapExec. I'm taking the local admin hash we got from exploiting broadcast multicast protocols and relaying them, and I'm spraying it across 5 different hosts in my lab environment. At work, though, in Pentest, I'm doing this against whole network. It's a Pentest. You give me a week to do it, I'm going to go loud. Okay? Let's see if you actually do detect it, though. And I'm dumping LSAS. LSAS is where cached credentials will be. SAM hives or SAM files in Windows have the local user credentials. LSAS is a process in Windows that maintains cached credentials for domain users. So I'm going against the whole network, and if you notice, that local admin hash worked on 2 hosts, .3 and .4. From just listening to the network, I obtained a user's credential that gave me now, eventually, access to another host. 2 hosts I have local admin on. And this is pretty common. We're seeing a lot of local admin use. Okay? And this is past the hash. Microsoft did try to patch it in 2016. And the way they patched it is you cannot pass the hash for local users who are not RID 500. RID 500 is a numerical identifier for local admin. So if you're a domain user, if you're a local admin, your hash can still be still be passed. Well, why would I want to pass the hash for a user that isn't local admin, that isn't domain user, that doesn't have any privilege? So I don't know what decision was made and why that decision was made. I don't know which IP they were drinking, but that's the patch that was applied. Next is pass the ticket. This is a bit stealthier. So instead of passing the hash, which uses NTLM authentication and patches LSAS, we're using pass the ticket. We'll talk about Kerberos later. But basically, we take a Kerberos ticket, which is another authentication mechanism in Windows, and we pass that ticket across. The user has already authenticated, and they've been given a ticket. When you came into the conference, you were given a badge. If I stole this badge and I walked over elsewhere, gained access, that is passing the badge. Okay? And you can do this with quite a few different tools. Rubeus is a great tool for this. That's also starting to get detected, though. By the way, if you're looking for a good cheat sheet, hacktricks.xyz, the link I have up there, I realize that it's hard to read. Really good cheat sheet. Sponsor them if you are an organization using their work. Luke and I made a decision since the beginning that if we're using an open source software, we're going to try to sponsor them. Give them some financial compensation, something for the time spent. Okay? So Hacktricks, really good cheat sheet if you need one, and definitely try to sponsor them if you can. So how do you detect lateral movement? This is not an easy thing to do, to be candid, because it involves a lot of tools. If you just have EDR, your ability to detect lateral movement will be limited. Because EDR, unless you have a central management and you're really taking a look at those logs closely and you have good alerting set up, it's per host alerting. Okay? If you have a SIM, though, you can take a look at why is Qasim logging on to 500 hosts? Why is my local admin from one box logging on to 500 other boxes? You can do that correlation in SIM. I have also seen that correlation in Excel. I kid you not, had a client when I was doing HIPAA assessment, they were pulling logs from EDR and in Excel, because in Excel you can pull data from a remote host, and they were running graphs in Excel. And it worked. It worked. So whatever works for you, even if it's stone tablets, may not be efficient. Do some correlation. Find out why is X logging onto 500 systems, because that should not be good. If you have a ticket, I got detected, I think it was a few months ago, because I had obtained a ticket from one host, a Kerberos ticket, and I logged on to a different host with that ticket. And this client's SIM detected that because they saw in Kerberos tickets, even though part of it is encrypted, there's an unencrypted part that tells you about the session, who requested the ticket, at what time, and from where. They analyzed that, and that's what they alerted on. Said, this ticket should not be used here. If you're seeing Mimikatz being used, definitely go after that. Honestly, though, if you see me using Mimikatz, probably not the host you should be going after. I learned from a guy a while back when I started doing pen testing. He taught me we would go on site to do a pen test. We would ask them for 2 conference rooms, both on the opposite side of the building. One side, we would plug in our laptop and start running Nessus. Then we would walk over to the other side, and that's where we'll be doing our pen testing. You are monitoring that one laptop on the other side of the building running very loud scans while we are going stealthy on this side over here. So take a look at malicious processes, but don't just be stuck with the bad tool names. All of my scripts generally are named after my coworkers. There is invoke Luke, there is invoke Jake, there's invoke Byron. And then this is where things get evil, and I want you to be evil. Okay? Deception. Create an account, a low privilege account, have it log onto a system or 2 systems or 3 systems, and then disable it. Credentials will be sitting in LSAS for a while. I'm going to grab those credentials, try to log using those credentials, try to literally move using those credentials, and that's how you detect me. So use deception. One thing, though, I would caution is first, secure harden your systems. Get to know your systems. I have seen a lot of honeypots that were misconfigured, or they were in an environment that was so misconfigured that I was able to use the honeypot to compromise the system. This one, workstation-to-workstation communication. Our colleague, Corey, he runs the Blue team. When I joined in the beginning, he told me about this, and I almost just flipped out of sadness. Because that is such a common thing that I do, and now you've taken that away from me. Okay? Workstation to workstation movement should not happen in AD environments, but it does, and when it does, you should be alerting on that. And there are some Windows features like Credential Guard that's going to make it difficult for me to do pass the hash, because Credential Guard is going to limit who can access empty hashes and Kerberos TGTs. And with Credential Guard enabled, even as local admin, I can't extract Kerberos TGTs. So use Credential Guard. Okay, so let's recap before we move on. At this point, we obtained hashes using exploitation of broadcast multicast protocols. We listened and we responded, okay? We listened, responded, got those hashes, relayed them, and we got local NT hashes, passed them along to other hosts, got local admin on 2 hosts. At this point, we have a domain user we obtained by exploiting broadcast multicast protocols, and we have local admin access on 2 boxes. So what do we do in domain? Let's start by first discussing Kerberos. There should be a whole class on Kerberos. I'll try to explain this. If you need a really good class on this, Nikhil Mittal does a really good class. He's with Altered Security now. He used to be with Pentester Academy. We also have our own class we'll give at conferences. I learned from him, so I would say maybe I'm 10% as good as him. We'll see. So Kerberos, you have, in this case, what I'm showing up there, a screenshot output of a command klist. It's one word, like a Kerberos list, klist. You run this command, you see all the Kerberos tickets that are issued to you. First, you have a ticket granting ticket. That's a TGT. If you go to a county fair and you get the admission ticket, you still have to get other tickets to go in and do the rides, but the admission ticket you get, that allows you to be here. That is TGT, ticket granting ticket. It is encrypted with KRB TGT user's hash. That user is disabled, it cannot log on anywhere. It is a user whose hash nobody except domain controller should have. And we know a ticket is valid because we can decrypt it using Kerberos TGT user's anti-hash. Okay, so that's our admission ticket. Next, we need a service ticket, TGS. That's ticket granting service ticket. I present my TGT, and I ask the domain controller to give me the TGS, the ticket granting service ticket, for maybe my SQL service, my HTTP service. I need to access a file system somewhere. That is what TGS is going to do. The TGS is encrypted with the service accounts hash. So imagine if I want to access MS SQL service that is running under MS SQL account on a box. First, I authenticate to the domain and get a TGT encrypted with KRB TGT's hash. Then, using that TGT, I get a TGS encrypted with service accounts hash. What ends up happening is you are obtaining those tickets and you can have them offline available to you. If you recall, TGT is encrypted with KRB-TGT's hash, TGS is encrypted with service accounts hash. So I can perform offline password cracking attacks against them. That's called kerberoasting. Kerberoasting is I obtained a service ticket and I try to crack it offline to get the service account's password. Service accounts generally have high privileges in the domain. So what I have in this case is we have two things in here. We first have the AES ticket for SVC account. The second ticket is RC4 for test service account. Microsoft now offers you the ability to have tickets that are encrypted with DES, RC4, AES, and that's AES 128 and 256. I tested this last week, unless I'm misunderstanding it. You still have to manually set in the service account in AD that it supports AES 128 and 256. Okay? So by default, we are using RC4, which is much easier to crack. And if we take a look at this, and let's do this. This is again me messing around with this last night. 40 megahashes per second is how fast I can crack a Kerberos ticket, an RC4 ticket. That is 40 million guesses per second. How is your welcome 123 going to stand against that? I had a client where service account name was backup. The password was backup. I don't need to do this. Honestly, I did this and I was so mad at myself because I've wasted resources and time. And that account was part of backup operators. The password was set in 1994. The Pentest was last year, okay? The password was almost as old as Luke. Oh, I'm sorry. Love you, man. Love you, bro. So that is how fast we are, and this is M2, it's trying to really be, not have a lot of heat. At work, we have the Alienwares, and mine is 3080, and I'm totally not bragging. And that one, I think it's 140 megahashes per second is how fast it cracks it.
He complains about my age, but he doesn't complain about the laptops I buy.
I do not. It runs Age of Empires great. So your service account has high privileges, and I can obtain any domain user. You don't need high privileges for this. Any domain user can obtain a Kerberos ticket for a service account, and then they can try to crack this offline. So why do we still keep giving them high privileges? All right? So what I want you to think about is managed service accounts. How many of you know about managed service accounts? Got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, Richmond, you know your stuff. So honestly, I did this in Texas, and 2 people raised their hands. In New York, it was 5, so we were close. Managed service accounts, the password is set and managed by Windows and AD. When you go into Service Manager and you try to set up which account is going to run this service, you only provide a username. You don't provide a password. Windows is negotiating that, because if you have to remember the service account password, you are using the service accounts wrong. That is not what they're for. You should not have to remember service account password. And then second problem we end up with is, if you have to change a service account password, how many systems you have to log on to manually to change it? I remember when I used to work in a healthcare EMR provider, I got a phone call, which interrupted me from watching my Game of Thrones. But they talked about how their whole domain is down, everything is down. We started looking at this. The service was running with the account of one of our employees, and he was on vacation, and his password had expired. So you're using service accounts wrong. You should be using managed or group managed service accounts where password is managed by AD, by Windows, and it doesn't have a service principal name, so I cannot Kerberos it. If you have to use a named service account where the service principal name is set, that's what I'm kerberoasting, set a 32-character password. Once you get to 17 characters, it's not worth for me to crack it. Unless, of course, your password is A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And again, deception. If you recall, we have two types of tickets in here. One is AES encrypted for an account, for SBC account. The second one for test service is RC4 encrypted. Which one do you think you should be using in your environments? I'm waiting. AES, yes, AES, until we start doing quantum. So if you should be using AES, but you start seeing RC4, that's a problem, right? So if you start requiring your service accounts to only use AES tickets, and I come in and I request an RC4 ticket because that's easier to crack, you have just detected me. That's what you should be doing. So create a fake service account and wait for it to be kerberoasted. Another issue we see is bad privileges. Saw a domain where the domain users were given right privileges to default domain controller's policy. Can let that sink in. Oh, and for any of you who don't have the Windows and AD admin experience, the group policy is what you apply to systems to manage their settings, okay, to manage their configurations. And if you are able to modify the domain controller's configuration, you have the keys to kingdom. Another thing we see very common, more common than maybe anything else, maybe not as common as broadcast protocols, but domain users, the group, given local admin access everywhere. So I compromise a domain user, I compromise an account named info with the password of info, or marketing with password of we're great, and I end up with local admin across the environment. One of my buddies got caught during a pen test, and he waited. He was RDP'd into a server, and he saw the alarm trip, the EDR trip. So he waits in there. He waits for the security team to log in to investigate. They log in to investigate. He dumps their hashes from LSAS and walks away. Okay? So local admins can get local hashes. They can get local cache credentials. So do not give local admin to anybody unless they need it. And if they really, really need it, ask them for how long, and then limit it. Okay? I used to work for a pretty big healthcare company, and they wouldn't give us sudo access to run our scripts on a Pentest tool. So I asked them, okay, can you give us sudo access just for one tool, for Nmap only, and that's it? That's all we need to use? They gave us sudo access to Nmap, and we just wrote an Nmap script that gives you root privileges, sudo Nmap. Service accounts with bad privileges. I once saw 32 service accounts that had DA. Your service accounts do not need DA. How many of you are running Tenable with a service account that has DA? Because Tenable has to log in everywhere. So try to limit, first of all, who has local admin or domain admin. And then service accounts should almost always never have domain admin. If a service account needs domain admin, you're doing it wrong. Okay? You need to talk to that vendor because it almost always is the vendor that wants their service account to be domain admin. Talk to the vendor and find out what privileges they need and give it just those privileges. And still, just like local admins, how long do you need this for? And if it's 6 months, at 6 months period, you're gonna have to request again. Make that request process for privileges very difficult. Make it painful, make it hurt. Because the misuse of that privilege can hurt the company, can hurt your assets, your users. If you're healthcare like I used to be, it can cause your patients a lot of pain. So I'll talk about the rest later. Authentication, anybody remember petite POTM? Did you know petite POTM still works after the patch? So petite POTM vulnerability, what it does is very nicely, by exploiting an API in Windows, asks it, give me your machine account hashes. So we ask the domain controller, give me your domain controller machine account hashes. And that was a very easy domain admin. As an unauthenticated user, within a minute, I could become domain admin. Microsoft patched it, so now you have to be a domain user before you can do that. So if your petite modem doesn't work, try it with credentials. If you have write privileges on a share, you can do this method to get some hashes. Basically, if you think about shortcuts, Windows shortcuts, you double click, takes you somewhere. So now imagine it's taking you to my Kali Linux box where Responder is running, okay? But I still have a problem. The user has to double click it. What if the shortcuts icon is loaded from my Kali Linux box where Responder is running? In that case, the user doesn't have to click that icon, that shortcut. They don't have to do anything. They just are in that folder where the shortcut is. Windows tries to load the icon, and I get the hash. So simply having the icon loaded from my Responder box, and the user just shows up in that folder. It's maybe just a very common network share that everybody's using. Oh, this is just my favorite. I think everything in here is my favorite. So everybody knows about tracking pixels, right? Your marketing companies sending tracking pixels or throwing them in the websites and whatnot. What if that tracking pixel is coming from a UNC path? So this is me sending out an email to provide an update on an ongoing security project. The email is written by AI, by the way, because I'm not that sophisticated. So the status update is going to a security person on the other side, and in the email, the tracking pixel points to my box running Kali Linux. They open up the email in Outlook, Outlook renders HTML, I get their hash. Simply a tracking pixel in Outlook, and I have security team's hashes. So this is what that would look like in the end. The same hash that you would get by exploiting broadcast multicast protocols. In this case, 3 billion guesses per second if you're using an RTX 3080. Thanks, Luke. Shares. I got a story for this one. IT was storing KeyPass database. KeyPass is a password manager, really good password manager. They stored the database in a network share that only IT had access to. The key for the encryption of that KeyPass database was stored next to it. KeyPass installer was stored next to it. So the moment I got IT intern's password, I owned the whole company. And MFA is not going to help you with any of this. None of this. Your MFA is preventing people from logging into email from outside, logging into your Citrix from outside, logging into VPN from outside. But if they're already inside, I have so many people tell me, we have MFA on our RDP. Okay, but do you have it on your file shares? Do you have it on WinRM? Do you have it over SMB, over CIFS, over WinRM, over PowerShell Remote? There's so many other services. Just having MFA is not going to be your solution. You need to start assuming assumed breach. This takes the cake in the end because earlier Luke was talking about zero trust, and AD has a lot of trust, okay? And what AD does is if you have a forest with multiple domains, both domains trust each other, one domain can query the other domain's resources. If I get domain admin in one domain, I get domain admin in the other domain. If I get domain admin, I get forest admin, which is enterprise admin. If a forest trusts another forest, I can very easily go domain admin in one forest to enterprise admin in another forest. Because that trust that occurs by default in the same forest and that occurs between different forests based on how you do it, in the end, there is a trust key stored in the NTDS file on the domain controller. So if I obtain domain admin, I can get that trust key and I can then forge my own Kerberos tickets. Because remember, the TGT, the Kerberos ticket is encrypted with KRB-TGT's hash, right? In this case, the ticket will be encrypted with that trust key. So I just forge an inter-realm TGT. I go from vendor forest to corp forest. Your HVAC vendor and your target. Oh, sorry. So all that problem I just talked about, how do we fix this? How do we start fixing our environments, our features in AD environment, okay? So first of all, do you really need that many domain admins? Do you really need that many enterprise admins? And let's take a next step. Does every domain admin need to be an enterprise admin? And does every enterprise admin need to be global admin? You really need to start inventorying that. Why does VP of operations have domain admin? I recently was told by a client of mine that we have 20 acquisitions and our team has no access in our acquisitions environments. Well, how do you know how well they're doing? Well, they send their logs to our SIM. Oh, so your networks are connected? Yes, they are. Oof, we need to do a pen test there. And then, do you really, really need those domain admins logging on to non-DCs, to non-privileged workstations? Why is your domain admin reading emails? Because I fished that domain admin, and now I have DA very easily. Services running with high privileges, not a great thing. Labs, you should be using labs. Except, it's Microsoft, right? There's always an except. So we used to tell everybody to use labs. So our clients have labs. Microsoft, I think it was a month ago, they have labs now built into Windows. They went from having what was called Windows Labs to now Microsoft Labs. They're both different tools. They don't work with each other. So now I've been helping a lot of clients with that. Basically trying to have them migrate from that version of Labs to the new one. So watch what Microsoft is changing too, because that's happening. But in the end though, Labs is going to make sure every Windows box has unique local admin credentials. So if I get local admin in one box, I can't relay it. I can't pass that hash elsewhere and become local admin. Use deception. So earlier I talked about honeypot users. Make sure that honeypot user is logging on somewhere periodically so it looks real. If your password policy says you need to change your passwords every 90 days, make sure the honeypot user is changing passwords every 90 days. And most importantly, make sure that honeypot's username is not honeypot user. Lastly, if there's one thing you walk away with, and this is to all the blue teamers, to sysadmins, to SOC analysts, use Bloodhound. Learn and use Bloodhound. Ask for permission from your team first. If you need to figure out how to run it, I'm volunteering my time. Come talk to me. I'll give you my LinkedIn also. I'm happy to help you set it up. Because Bloodhound is going to tell you everything that is happening in your AD, every stupid configuration that was done 20 years ago. It's going to tell you how somebody can go from point A to point B. So in this case, what it's telling me that I first have the workstation box. That box has a session from FileMaker. So if I'm on workstation, I can dump FileMaker's hashes, which can then RDP to file server. So FileMaker, I can obtain from workstation, I can end up at file server, which has an account from SVC account, a session from SVC account. And what ends up happening in this case is I can get domain admin because SVC account is domain admin. It's giving me a path that I can go from workstation A to domain admin, and this is how I can do it, the whole thing. And you should know this. Even if you can't fix it, you should know about it, okay? That's me. Thank you, appreciate your time. That QR code is for LinkedIn, but scan at your own risk, because it's a QR code. I do give you my link in the bottom, all right? I promise there's nothing wrong going on in here. I'm just a red teamer. Any questions? Do we have time for questions? Fine, we have 5 minutes. Yes?
How does Azure Active Directory change things?
How does what?
Azure Active Directory.
How does Azure Active Directory change things? Makes them worse? And it's because, first, we are moving to cloud without training. We're moving to cloud without obtaining the skill sets. So we don't know that while on on-prem AD, you could add any domain user could domain join with some privileges. 10 boxes to AD. In Azure AD, it's 50. We aren't training our sysadmins for that transfer to Azure AD. There are some really good tools in Azure AD. The monitoring is amazing. And the deception in Azure AD is great. If I start password spraying a domain controller on on-prem AD, it's easy, fast, great. In Azure AD, after 10 bad attempts, it's going to start telling me every single user is valid and every single password is valid. So waste my time. And you will see in the logs where I was logging from. You'll also see Qasim works out of Pittsburgh, and now he's in New York. How's that happening? Oh, all of a sudden he's logging in from Kenya. That doesn't sound right. So it does have a lot of good privileges, really good solutions and monitoring. Make sure you pay. So I think E5 license has a lot more options than E3 license does. But before you make the move, make sure you understand what you're doing. Make sure you understand the differences. You don't have that fine-grained password policy in Azure AD. What you do have is the ability to say you cannot use welcome1 as a password, or ability to say you cannot have the company name in your password. So good and bad. In my experience, companies that don't do good training before moving to cloud, I love that because it makes my job easier. I kind of don't want my job to be easier though. What else? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you recommend modifying the SE debug privilege so local admins can't dump LSAS?
Yes, I do recommend that, but I also would recommend testing stuff first. And I honestly don't know what that privilege is, but from what you're saying, preventing it from accessing LSAS, that sounds like a great thing.
Yeah, by default, admins of boxes can run SE debug privilege.
Oh, SE debug, yes, sorry.
Yeah,
yes.
processes LSAS. If you set it up to like an AD group that only members of the group
Yeah.
run any hamstring communicate.
Yeah, so disabling SE debug, not being able to dump LSAS, really good idea. Test it out. Test it out first, because, and I would say the same thing I should have said about broadcast and multicast, because stuff can break. And that is something that I would say maybe is a level 2 or 3 for people when it comes to hardening, that disabling SE debug privilege, because a lot of times your software is gonna want it, okay? Last question, and then I'm gonna shut the F up. Who was, yeah?
What's the most creative use of deception?
What's most what?
Creative use of deception.
Most creative use of deception that I've seen from Blue Team. Can I tell you one from a nurse? So I was doing a pen test, a wireless pen test, and I was walking around with my laptop, and this nurse saw me, and she goes, "Hey, honey, you must be tired walking around like this. Why don't you go sit in the nursing station and do it from there?" I go and sit at the nursing station, and she locks the door behind me. And she called security. I got thrown out. I showed them my, I know, right? That's awesome. Truly heroes, man. But yeah, it was amazing. It was awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. I'll be right outside if you have any questions. Thank you.